Hello everyone, coming to you again with a book review, and today I wanted to briefly discuss Revolutionary Road, which I just got done finishing completely. I apologize if this video gets posted a little bit later, but I just wanted to make sure that I could fully finish it and kind of take it all in and basically figure out ultimately what I want to say about this particular book. Now, Revolutionary Road was actually adapted into a film. As you can see by the cover here, we have Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, who did this movie together, and it's based upon this book by Richard Yates. And for the most part, this book follows, in particular, the main characters, April and Frank Wheeler. And these two are basically a sort of younger couple in the prime sort of the 1950s. And within that time period, they are sort of accustomed to this whole idea of, living in suburbia and starting a family and settling down. And once they start to sort of settle down within this kind of lifestyle, it becomes rather difficult for them, because a lot of the time these characters have many conflicts, and they kind of don't know how to deal with their relationship, and you sort of see it become gradually worse and worse over time. But I think the book kind of tries to go with some kinds of hills, in that there are points where it does feel like everything is alright, and then it slips back into being bad, and then it goes back up to being good. So it's just basically narrowing down the ups and downs of having a married lifestyle within this time period. And I find it very fascinating, because a lot of books don't really touch on this subject matter, or really this era, because we often think of the 1950s as the perfect time to live in, because there were so much opportunities and the economy just was so well off, and people were able to support themselves and make a living, even though we did have these side struggles that obviously are clear, especially when it comes to human rights as well as women's rights, which were pretty limited in the 1950s, which you can kind of see with April's character and how she's technically a housewife, but you can tell by her sort of personality that she really doesn't want to ultimately be a housewife. And you kind of get a sense too of Frank's character and how he's really trying to support the family and trying to make a living, but everything around them is just so dull and boring, and it doesn't really seem to bring a lot of value within their relationship and the things that surround sort of their relationship. In particular, Frank's job, which is really, really boring for him, and not the most entertaining job in the world, but he does want to support the family in any way he can, and he feels that it's better to be in this trap than to be liberated, because I'm sacrificing for my family. And then at the same time, April is someone who doesn't really want to live within this whole lifestyle. At one point she talks with Frank and this is in particular a fairly important point to note in the novel, where she basically discusses about moving to Paris and kind of starting a new life because that's what she wants. And Frank ultimately, it's sort of suggested, doesn't really want that, but because he believes that a lot of what April suggests is not fairly rational. And it sort of makes sense. I mean, I think I could understand a little bit more of where Frank was coming from, because April wasn't necessarily being realistic as to what they could accomplish and what they could ultimately do as a family. But it does seem like they do have these different ideas of when it comes to what family sort of means to them. And I think this ends up bringing up, again, sort of issues with with women's sort of health, so to speak, because at certain points April doesn't really want to bear kids anymore. And the whole concept of abortion, which I'm not going to get into, but it is brought up in this book. So if you feel like that this conflict is a little bit too uncomfortable for your taste, then I would suggest maybe skipping this book. But despite it being mentioned, I don't think it's fairly forceful at all. But ultimately what I think it's trying to say is how at some points April feels like that she doesn't really want to live in that typical female role that has been established within that time period. Because again, females were intended to be more those that took care of the house and didn't make the salary, and who took care of the kids. And really, you do get a sense really of their relationship, Frank's and April's, as well as those that surround them. However, I feel that it would have been nice if the author touched a little bit more with the kids. It seems like that the kids are sort of left in the background, and I think when you're dealing with a subject matter like this, you cannot not really bring up the kids. I mean, the kids play a really big role in this whole this whole scenario of having this family value structure. And I think it'd be interesting if the author chose to include more of the kids. But again, April and Frank Wheeler's kids aren't really in the forefront of this book so much. They're kind of just left into the background, even though one of the kids kind of plays a kind of significant role, but is not really given much personality or depth or character, really. You don't really get a sense of a lot of the kids. And I thought that was a major issue that I had in particular with this book, because I think in order to discuss this kind of family value structure, you almost needed to include the kids in there. Maybe the author felt that for kids it would just be too uncomfortable to bring them in. But I think within these kinds of circumstances, I think kids would be more caught up within the arguments and within the circumstances. And it seems like this book doesn't try to take it from that angle, because a lot of the time when April and Frank are arguing, it's not really when the kids are around. And usually I think kids in particular are more exposed to their parents being angry towards each other. And I think it would have made sense had the author decided to put in more of the kids, but that wasn't really necessarily included. So if you might have an issue with that, then this is probably not the novel for you. But I think it deals with a fairly interesting subject matter in how sometimes the American dream, so to speak, or the family values lifestyle sometimes is very challenging for a lot of people because of how sometimes we feel like we want something more out of life than what we already have. And I think it shows within these characters because they are fairly self-centered characters and desire what's best for themselves, even though I feel Frank is a little bit more on the side of sacrificing for himself than really April is, because April ultimately wants whatever she wants. And I think even though you do feel maybe a more liking to one character over the other and taking a side with between the couple, I still think that it balances out fairly well. And again, Frank is not a perfect character at all. I mean, he's got issues too. At one point you'll even see in the novel he has an affair with somebody else. So you'll see that happen and see how that takes shape into what the novel is trying to say, and also the actions between the characters. But really, even though it's not the most, I guess, lighthearted book, and it's fairly dark in its content, I think overall what it's trying to say is, I think, fairly profound, and I think what a lot of people should take into consideration when they and if they choose to read it, because I think it gives people an idea of maybe what they ultimately value and what they would like to see themselves be in the future, and thinking about what they ultimately want, and kind of brings up the whole concept of making sure that you kind of create this kind of structure within your life that you feel will lead you into a more positive direction. And it seems like these characters didn't really take the steps to do that, and then as a result they ended up unhappy at times. And you'll kind of see how the novel too, again, this novel ends fairly darkly, so I'm not going to give that away, but at the same time I still want people to understand that this book is fairly just not so much dark in a disturbing sense, but just very complex with its characters and character interactions, and even though ultimately I don't fully sympathize so much with the character as much, I can say that I understand certain aspects of where they're coming from, and you get a sense, sort of, I think, of both April and Frank, but I think you get more of a better sense with Frank, because Frank, I think, is just given more time within the book rather than April, who's given time but maybe not as much time as Frank. And I think the novel tries to paint itself as Frank being sort of the leading figure in the entire thing, even though it's not told through anybody's perspective except the author's. And you'll also see how they also have side characters again, like the Campbells, who are their neighbors, the Givings, who are also their neighbors too. Really, they kind of serve as sort of these outsiders, and even they kind of don't understand the dark reality that's going on within April's and Frank's relationship. So that's, I think, also important to note. And if you're interested actually in the movie, which I think is fairly well done, especially with the acting, from the clips that I've seen online. But for the most part, it does seem like the movie actually takes a lot of lines from the book, like literally just off the page. And it's so fascinating because literally when I was reading it, I go, wow, that's literally what Frank said from every word, every exact word. So it really does follow the novel closely, even though the novel isn't really, you wouldn't really think of this book being able to be made as a movie, because the way it's structured is fairly is fairly loose and not like a screenplay. But at the same time, the movie manages, I think, to do a really good job of sort of emphasizing the whole points of what the novel is trying to say. But it's sort of a sad book at the same time. You do kind of want the characters to get along, and you want them to somehow see what they, felt for each other, because again, it kind of does emphasize within the past that they did really deeply, profoundly care about each other, but just through time and being together and living together, it just seems like there were just things that couldn't ultimately end up working out. And I think this is what you see a lot nowadays. I think it's fairly clear from looking at how marriage 50% of the time in the United States, and sort of probably the majority of the Western world, doesn't end up working. And it's sad because at the same, there's, I think, a part of us that wants things to work out. But there's no really ultimate guarantee that things will. But at the same time, I think the book, even though when it's dealing again with a fairly sad and somewhat uncomforting subject matter, it does it in a fairly, I think, adult and mature way. Even though I will say that the aspects of some of and traits of some of the characters, in particular April and Frank, make it maybe hard for some people to identify with and have sympathy for. But at the same time, I think these kinds of characteristics within their personality should come through because of the circumstances that they're in. So it's kind of hard to identify with them unless there's been people that have had these kinds of similar circumstances as maybe Frank and April. So again, it's just all how you choose to interpret it. But I feel that even though the book is dark and it is sad, it still brings, I think, an important message home, and I think can make a lot of people think about what they would value ultimately, and what lifestyle they want to maybe live in within the future. And I think this book provides a foundation of understanding that sometimes the traditional way of establishing your life doesn't really work out for a lot of people, even though if they may initially want it to, and that sometimes it's maybe not even the partner's or a partner's fault. It's just that the circumstances that end up occurring result in just a decline within the relationship. And you'll kind of see this as the book goes on, and how it just kind of gets worse and worse. And it's kind of just depressing to read. So again, if you don't like depressing books, if you don't like dark subject matters, then this may not be your cup of tea. But even though it's a lot different from a lot of the novels I tend to read, I still think it was an interesting book, and I think the things that it deals with really bring home the struggles that people face when dealing with family and dealing with marriage. So yes, I think it's definitely recommendable. Again, I think even though it does bring up that the A word, abortion, and it does bring up the other A word, affair, there are still things within it that I think bring to light a lot of things that can be relatable to us as people within the real world. Even though ultimately there are maybe some things within this book that may be a little bit over dramatic. But I think that's ultimately all that I can say about the novel as a whole. Again, any questions, comments, concerns, I'm more than happy to answer them. But until next time, everybody.